Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to PaxMedica's channel. Joining us, Howard, the Chief Executive Officer, is going to be breaking down the investor presentation and showing us what's pretty much going on under the hood of PaxMedica. So first and foremost, welcome back, sir.
Thank you. Nice to be back.
A pleasure. So I'll let you run with this. Pull up the investor deck and by all means, give us the full download what's going on here.
Okay, very good. Let's start right here. So PaxMedica is working on therapeutics that address serious neurologic disorders. And in particular, we're working in one area that's actually one of the largest unmet needs, which is autism spectrum. You can read our cautionary note. We work in a category of drugs called anticholinergic drug therapies. And there are really, there's really only one drug in this category today, and that's our drug PAX-101, which is an IV form of Suramin. What's really interesting about our plan is not only are we studying it in autism, but it happens to also be a drug that's been used for a very long time to save people who get infected with a rare tropical disease called human African trypanosomiasis, which we call HAT. That particular indication has a special program at the FDA where they can accelerate the approval of it, provided that we bring the right information to the process, and actually we can get the drug approved for this rare tropical disease in the US prior to having it approved for autism spectrum disorder. However, we are running an autism spectrum disorder study around the same time as we'll be seeking approval for HAT. And that is really at the heart of our plan. So first, to seek approval for a rare tropical disease, but also while we're doing that, study it for autism in a much larger trial than what we've done before. Let me advance the slides. We have several catalysts coming through 2024. One of the most important ones is this potential to receive significant non-dilutive capital in 24 to 30 months. By submitting this data for an NDA for the African sleeping sickness HAT indication, we could receive a voucher from the federal government that actually has a significant amount of value, and I'll explain to you in just a moment how we realize that value. We did complete an IPO in August last year. We collected about $6 million in net proceeds, and we've since then raised some additional capital, which you can read about online. And we have now what we believe access to enough capital to complete our plans through 2024. This is our team. The founder, Michael Derby, is executive chairman. I'm the CEO. Zach Rome is the other founder of the company as COO. Both Michael and Zach founded the company about 5 years ago, based on a publication they read on the use of this drug in autism spectrum disorder. Stephen Sheldon joined us last summer and helped with the IPO. He's an experienced, longtime operator and entrepreneur in the pharmaceutical industry, and recently spent the last 10 years in Asia overseeing a private company there. Stefan Schwabe is an MD, PhD neurologist who joined the company last fall. He's spent quite a bit of time in the industry, most recently as the head of clinical development at Supernus Pharmaceuticals, a company that has specifically focused on neurologic syndromes for the past 15 to 18 years. All of us have significant industry experience. Some of these companies below are companies that we have founded in the past and moved on from because we've sold them to other owners. Other companies, of course, are companies where we started our career, such as Merck, where both Michael and I began our careers many years ago. Our board includes Karen LaRochelle, John Coelho, and Chuck Casamento. All three of those are experienced, longtime pharmaceutical industry executives. Chuck, in particular, has had a long history in very similar companies like PaxMedica, and having founded and led and also exited companies like that, we believe he's a great addition to the board. Most recently, Karen and John are more of the big pharma industry experience. They have spent many years in companies like Sanofi and Merck and other places such as Forest Labs. So let me talk a little bit about our NDA submission plans, because I think that's really at the heart of our program today. We are working to get this NDA submitted as quickly as we possibly can, but this is the NDA for the neglected tropical disease. Now, why are we talking about a neglected tropical disease when we're studying autism? Well, the reason here is because this is the fastest route to potentially get the drug to market here in the US. And there's a special program that gives us not only 7 years of exclusivity, even without a patent. So we would be the first company to bring this drug to the US ever. And if we're successful in doing that, we would get essentially access to the market alone. No other form of drug, of the drug Suramin, could be in the market for the next 7 years after we've got this approved. We would hope to get a priority review voucher. These are special programs, they're special pieces of paper essentially that we could use if we wanted to ask the FDA to accelerate the review of another NDA. So, and these priority review vouchers can be used for any drug in any category. We get them as a reward for having brought this neglected tropical disease therapy to market. But the priority review voucher that you receive as part of this package can be used to get any drug through the FDA on a priority. These are often sold by the companies that create them. Would we, have this PRV awarded to us if we do the work essentially to get the NDA approved? We would potentially sell this PRV when we receive it. And that is one of the, I would say, the most unique parts of our program, that about 2 years from now, we could bring in a significant amount of capital that essentially is non-dilutive to the shareholders at that time. We intend to file this NDA for the hat infections in 2024. There is no way to run a prospective, meaning a trial that you run today, when you're trying to compare a drug for a deadly infection. This African sleeping sickness infection, unfortunately, is so lethal that most patients, if they're not treated within the first 2 months with Suramin, will go on to have a difficult and not very long process of dying. This is a deadly infection if untreated. We treat this infection in stage 1 with Suramin here. This is a now standard of care in the world. The only place that this happens today is in Uganda or Malawi, which are in Eastern Africa. They have been the epicenters of recorded infections for a very long time. We have the exclusive license to use the treatment records for hundreds of these patients who were treated successfully in the last 20 years in these hospitals in Uganda and Malawi. And we get to use those to create a filing with the FDA to show that these people who were treated with the drug actually survived the infection. This has been a standard of care since 1920 in Africa. Any patient who gets this infection is treated with this drug. Now, the drug is not available outside of the ministries of health of these countries because it's essentially kept in stockpile for these emergencies. This is a rare disease. Maybe 10 people a year get this disease. So the stock, of course, is never needed to be more than what could be supplied for those people. However, under the program that the US Congress has established for the rare tropical diseases, not only is the parasite that causes this disease on this program list as one of the parasites covered under this rare disease program. So right now we have the clinical program going on in Africa. We are pulling down the records from these hospitals, putting them into electronic format, what's called a clinical report form. That'll be assembled and compared to a natural history cohort that the FDA has also seen and agreed to. This is a group of patients who got the infection back before the availability of the drug, before 1920, and we have their treatment course and, of course, their recording of death from the infection. We have orphan designation for this drug right now, so provided that we can get all of this data to the FDA in the next year or so, as we expect, and get FDA approval, we'll be able to take advantage of this orphan designation, and then upon approval, we would be a new chemical entity in the US. We would have up to 7 years of market exclusivity, orphan drug. We're also building the supply chain for the drug because despite the fact this has been a standard of care for 100 years, no company has actually made a commercial supply of it ever. So if successful, we will be the first to make a commercial supply in the world. So our milestones for through 2024 are simply to get PAX 101, the NDA filed for HAT, which is a rare tropical disease, get that priority review voucher, sell it, take the 7 years of commercial exclusivity and use that to establish the drug in another indication, namely autism spectrum disorder. Now, we've studied autism spectrum disorder, and I'm going to tell you some of the details of this. But to begin with, autism is a disease that really is unfortunately increasing in numbers and scope. When we first started to promote the company just 2 years ago, it was 1 in 58 children had been diagnosed with autism. Now it's gone to 1 in 44. It's increasing in awareness, but it's also probably increasing in prevalence as well. The core symptoms of autism are these three that we have in teal here. It is the significant deficit in social communication, the ability to be in a group of people, meaning more than one person, and communicating effectively. These children and later as adults are unable to do this in large order. They also exhibit these repetitive patterns of behavior, spinning and rocking and banging, sometimes to a point of injuring themselves, all part of their what's sometimes called self-stimulation. And then finally, a profound impairment in functioning, meaning that they never get past a certain level of functionality in their life. Some people with autism are highly intelligent, obviously, just like people without autism are highly intelligent. And some of them have extraordinary capabilities, and yet they may not be able to drive a car or even learn how to drive a car or be able to tolerate being in traffic. So this is a very specific impairment in functioning that goes along with social communication and the repetitive physical behavior. All told, the pharmaceutical market for autism in the U.S. is significant. Globally, it's going to reach $5 billion in the next couple of years. All of this is treating non-core symptoms, mostly irritability and ADHD, which do run in these subjects as well, but they're not considered to be core symptoms. All right, so. One of the more exciting things that's happened in autism in the last 20 years is that a new treatment pathway emerged from a different understanding of what may be causing some of the symptoms of autism. So, University of California, San Diego researchers in 2017 published a paper about children who have been treated for autism by blocking their purine receptors. So here in this graphic, what we show is that all cells that are sort of in a normal resting phase will exhibit a certain amount of purine receptors on their cell surface. All cells have purine receptors, and they will use ATP, triphosphate, which is the most abundant transmitter of neural information and energy in the body. All cells function by having ATP essentially join onto purine receptors to transfer that energy. Under an immune response, cells can go under stress, producing more purine receptors and demanding more ATP, which is provided to make sure that whatever needs to be done to respond to that immune problem is done and done quickly. So if you get sick from some bacterial infection or viral infection, you won't feel well. A lot of that is the cells under stress, mostly your immune system cells, and producing the types of activity they need to get rid of whatever it is that has set off the immune system, a bacteria, some pathogen, or perhaps some traumatic event. In all of our, sort of normal cellular system responses, there is a return to normal sort of cellular function. So cell starts in a kind of if you will, a ready state that goes to a stress state, and then ultimately will return to a ready state. Their cells in their immune system stay under stress all the time. So when we block this with a purine blocker, which is what an antipurinergic drug is, and specifically PAX-101 Sermin is the only known drug that blocks purine receptors that's available in today to use in humans, we would expect to see a restoration of normal cell functions, a reduction in inflammation, and an improvement in cellular signaling. And all that may result, at least in these children, in a change in their outward behaviors. That was the speculation. So we looked at this after the publication in 2017. We decided to take to mount another trial. I'm sorry. We decided to launch another trial to extend the learning that that they had created initially in this use of antiparanoid drugs. And in our trial, we used the aberrant behavior checklist ABC core scores 2, 3, and 5. We also used the total scores, which included ADHD and irritability, and we divided them into 3 groups. We used a high dose group of 20 milligrams per kilogram, which is the original publication in 2017 used that. We used a low dose group, 10 milligrams per kilogram, and an IV placebo group. We dosed them 3 times over an 8-week period, and then we studied them out to 14 weeks. And that's what the whole study design looks like. So we screened them to make sure that we understood what their severity of autism was at the time they entered the study, drug, and we screened them again at the very end of the visit in week 11 and week 14. And what we saw overall was we had 6 sites in South Africa with 52 boys who got recruited. We had 44 who could complete. We did run part of this program during the beginnings of COVID in 2020 and into 2021. So there were some closures and lockdowns in South Africa where we ran the study, where some people just couldn't get back to a study site after they'd had an infusion or they'd had an evaluation. But we did get 44 boys to complete the study altogether. And here's how they did. As a group, in every ABC category, they had a slight improvement to a large improvement. So starting with irritability, which is non-core, a fairly significant improvement, a point change, a negative point change means a reduction in irritability score. In social withdrawal, a reduction in social withdrawal was achieved with the 10 milligram per kilogram dose. This is the low dose group. Stereotypic behavior is that rocking and spinning behavior, also a core symptom. And in hyperactivity, which is non-core, we also saw a significant response, a reduction in hyperactivity. So in irritability and hyperactivity, the interesting thing to note here is almost all of these children were pre-treated with drugs for those conditions, and they still got a response with Suramin, with PAX-101. And over on the right, we've just grouped them into the categories of core versus total, and you'll see there are changes when you group them together. And then as we look at them in a different way over time as a group, we can see the placebo response goes up and down through the time period, but the 10 milligram per kilogram group continues to trend downward, whether it's looking at the core group or the total group. Now, these data were not statistically significant. We were not predictable response for the group. The 20 milligram per kilogram group also performed well in some ways, but not as well as this 10 milligram per kilogram group. And in fact, when we looked at a second measure, a secondary endpoint, clinical global impression of improvement, these children were deemed to be very much improved compared to the placebo group. And in this case, we did actually get a statistically significant p-value of 0.008, which is a very strong result. Now, this is a secondary measure, so having a strong result in a secondary measure isn't like having a strong result in a primary measure. However, combined with this, we think this is a very strong signal for us to continue on the work with Suramin in a larger group. And in fact, that's what we're intending to do. So we believe that both of these dose regimens, the 10 milligram per kilogram group and the 20 milligram per kilogram group, showed meaningful change. And we did have a statistically significant outcome in the 10 mg per kg group when it came to the clinical global impression of improvement. We will be confirming these studies, these results in a larger study, and we will likely have that larger study started early next year. Now, our drug is an IV infusion. So PAX-101, the traditional way of using the drug is through an IV infusion. It takes about 30 minutes to infuse the drug. However, we are developing an intranasal form of this drug because we think, obviously, this will be a lot easier for patients to use and their families to use. They won't need to go to a clinic setting to get an IV. And also, more importantly, for the long term, this is a great line extension for the drug because not only will make it available to many more people who might prefer to have the drug delivered in means other than an IV, but it also be patent protected through 2039, presuming that we can get our claims through, which are being filed around the world right now. So we think that this will be the next up. If PAX-101 is approved for autism, we expect to follow up with a PAX-102 intranasal form. So our latest financial information is we went public in August of 22. We ended up the third quarter of last year, our last reporting quarter, with 5.6 million in cash and 2.7 million in accounts payable. And then in November, we were able to enter into a committed equity investment agreement with Lincoln Park for up to 20 million. We have a resale S1 that was declared effective in December of 22. And then we just secured another 3.2 million in growth capital from Lynn Partners. So we are looking for opportunities to accelerate both our HAT and our autism programs. There are ways that we can, if you will, spend more to go faster. We're looking at those and very carefully evaluating them. If we find that there are opportunities to do that, then we will raise more capital later on this year in order to accelerate the applications and to accelerate the autism program itself. So our business goals really are these 5. We want to raise awareness of the company's mission to develop these drugs. This is a serious unmet need in autism. There are no drugs approved for the core symptoms today. We are, though, going to first submit the NDA for the HAT indication, which is the infection. We will hopefully receive a priority review voucher, which we'll plan to sell once we have it in hand. And that's all I have to present today. Thank you.
Well, on that note, I definitely appreciate these insights, and I'll pass the question off to the viewers. We'd love to know what you guys think about all of this in that comment section below, and consider subscribing, because as news comes down the wire, as some of these catalysts hit, we're going to update you as well. But as always, we look forward to catching you in the next one.